Let's be very clear, people smuggling is at the heart of how the European Union should tackle the migration crisis. Of the 1 million irregular arrivals in Europe in 2015, we know at Europol from our investigations that up to 90% of them had had their journey facilitated by a criminal organisation, paying anything between €2,500 or up to €10,000 for that journey. So that has made people smuggling the fastest growing criminal sector in Europe, worth up to €5 billion a year. At Europol, we've identified a criminal community that's grown up almost overnight of almost 50,000 people smugglers now. So we really have to crack down on these criminals as a major way of dealing with the migration crisis. These are professional criminals mainly, organised on international lines, criminal syndicates that are coming together, specialist providers operating as part of a common group, those that are specialised in recruitment, very often using social media platforms like Facebook to recruit their victims and sell a package for the migrants to come to Europe. There are others that are involved in financing the operation, and of course many criminals that are specialising in transporting them. So this is the picture that we're seeing. We're also seeing how victims are not only tricked into paying the money and putting their lives into the hands of these criminals, but also as they make the journey, they're being exploited, they're being subjected to violence, labour and sex exploitation, even during their journey. So this is a terrible situation for the refugees, the asylum seekers and the migrants once they find themselves held captive by these criminal groups. At the moment, Libya is a great concern for us because on the central Mediterranean route, we're seeing 95% of all the traffic coming through Libya. And from regions, of course, that are in the hands of militias, where our reach in the European law enforcement community is not so strong for obvious reasons. We're depending on our EU partners to try and improve that as well. On the Eastern Mediterranean, of course, we've seen the very positive impact of the EU-Turkey agreement. And it's reduced the flow, as people know, from thousands a day to maybe less than 100 over the last several months. What that has done is to force the smugglers to innovate, to change their tactics. Now, instead of using large inflatable boats between Turkey and Greece, they're now using speedboats, jet skis, so that they can disembark the passengers more quickly. They're using clandestine means to move the migrants that are held in Greece at the moment across the green borders further north, for example, in passenger trains, on lorries. They're using forged documents much more as a clandestine means to move criminals away. So we're putting the pressure on the people smugglers, and I think that's contributing to a way in which we can deal with the crisis. We have to understand the sort of human condition in which many of the refugees, the migrants find themselves. They're in a desperate situation, and they will do almost anything, I think, to try and reach Europe. And of course, the criminals exploit that desperation by selling them this fake story, by selling them via social media platforms very often a guarantee that they can safely get to Europe, that they will go on vessels providing medicine and water and life jackets. And of course, the reality is very different to that. And we've seen over 4,000 people lost their lives this year alone, again in the Mediterranean. There was a shocking incident this year in the Mediterranean where migrants were forced onto an already overcrowded vessel. They left the shore of Libya, they went out to sea, and then at gunpoint they had the engine taken away from the boat. 200 of the migrants were forcibly had their life jackets removed, and they were just left abandoned to their own fate, and many of them lost their lives until a rescue vessel could come here. These criminals have no scruples, no principles. They will make $1 out of your death if they can. They don't care about it. In 2015, as the European Union as a whole responded to the migrant crisis, at Europol we were making the case for how people smugglers were at the heart of this problem. And EU institutions, the political leaders in Europe have responded to that, given the means by which Europol can now and has done established a new European migrant smuggling centre. And we've brought together some of the best investigators in Europe. We've increased the amount of resources that we have, and what we've put in place is the ability to share on a much higher level intelligence each day between the national investigators. We are supporting at the moment 60 high-level investigations right now. We have identified over 50,000 people smugglers in our database. We've identified 500 suspected vessels that we think people smugglers are using in the Mediterranean as well. So we have leveraged a much more efficient operational response right across Europe to identify the smugglers and to put their business, put their activities out of business. Our mind goes back, of course, to the terrible incident when we found in the back of a small coach in Austria the dead bodies of dozens of migrants been left abandoned to their own fate. In that case, very quickly, Europol was able to use its capabilities to connect the different national authorities who were investigating that case. And in our database, we could find connections between the suspects in that case with 3 other national investigations that we are supporting around Europe. So Europol's ability to connect hundreds of different law enforcement agencies by allowing for the quick exchange of police information, and then its ability to put together teams of investigators to work quickly across border, in that case and in many others, quickly identified the international criminal syndicate that was behind that terrible tragedy in order that we can eventually lead to their arrest and successful prosecution. Every day, currently over 60 running operations at Europol, we are working with all member states to try and hit these people smugglers wherever they operate in Europe.